many people, the name Ethiopia brings to mind pictures of starving children living in dirt huts. These famous pictures of Ethiopian famines give the developed world the idea that Ethiopia is impoverished and has always been. To be fair, Ethiopia is by no means a rich country today and is among the poorest countries with many internal conflicts. But Ethiopia is also a very important country for the idea of Africa, as it holds the headquarters of the African Union in its capital, Addis Ababa. This might seem surprising on the surface, but looking back at history, we can see why Ethiopia is so inspirational for Africa. Ethiopia was one of the first countries to adopt Christianity in the 4th century, even beating out Rome. At this time, Ethiopia was controlled by the kingdom of Aksum, and in the 3rd century, a Persian philosopher called this kingdom one of the great powers of the world, alongside Persia, Rome, and China. More than 1,000 years later, in 1884, Africa was divided up by European powers, with all African territory being taken and colonized, except for Ethiopia, which actually fought off the Italians who tried to invade. Because of this continued independence, Ethiopia was a great inspiration to African countries during decolonization, with many adopting the Ethiopian flag's colors, and the African Union headquarters was placed in Addis Ababa. Sadly, even though Ethiopia did retain its independence, European powers were still able to exploit it, and Ethiopia was never able to industrialize. This, along with the Communist Revolution and many internal conflicts, has left Ethiopia as poor and on the world stage, largely an unimportant country. But with Ethiopia's power throughout history, I want to see what the world would be like if Ethiopia was still a great power. Before I start on the story of how Ethiopia could be powerful today, I want to explain Ethiopia's history. The history of Ethiopia starts with Egyptian accounts of the land to the south of the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians called the land to the south Punt and traded with them for goods such as ivory, gold, incense, and myrrh. In the 15th century BC, the Egyptian ruler Queen Hatshepsut sent a trading expedition to Punt, which was the largest contact Egypt had with the area. Centuries later, the culture of Di-Emet rose up, possibly from 800 to 600 BC. Very little is known about Di-Emet, including the exact dates when it existed, and if it was a kingdom or just a group of similar cultures. It is also unknown if Di-Emet evolved into the most important Ethiopian kingdom of Aksum or not. The kingdom of Aksum came to power around 100 BC, and by the turn of the millennium, Aksum conquered to the Red Sea coast and down into the Ethiopian highlands. At this time, Aksum was surrounded by Himyar kingdoms across the Red Sea, and Nubian kingdoms of Meroe to the north. In the following centuries, the power of Aksum continued to grow because of its important location. Aksum's position along the Red Sea allowed it to dominate trade between the Indian Peninsula and the Romans. During these centuries of Aksum's ascent, the main event happening in the world around Aksum was the Roman-Persian rivalry. This rivalry persisted between the Eastern Roman Empire and Sassanid Empire after the Western Roman Empire fell. During this rivalry, all three of these powers competed over the Arabian Peninsula, with the Byzantine and Sassanids creating puppet states in the north, and Aksum conquering the Himyar across the Red Sea. Also during this time, Aksum gained influence over the Nubian kingdom of Alodia. At this point, Aksum reached its height of power, controlling a large territory and dominating Red Sea trade, but it only declined from its height. Aksum's downfall was primarily caused by the ascent of Islam, and especially the Islamic caliphates. The first Islamic caliphate began with Muhammad's quest in Arabia, and this caliphate and its successors continued to expand until they controlled territory from Spain in the west to India in the east. These caliphates greatly reduced Aksum's importance because they moved Red Sea trade through their own territory instead of Aksum's. As well as a decrease in trade, Islam itself started spreading to regions around Ethiopia, making it an isolated Christian kingdom in a sea of Islam. Aksum finally collapsed around 960, and Ethiopia remained disunited until 1337 with the founding of the Zagwe dynasty. The Zagwe dynasty was the spiritual successor to Aksum, as it was dominated by the same Habesha ethnic group and practiced Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. Not much is known about the Zagwe dynasty, but it was centered around the Ethiopian highlands and possibly controlled more territory than Aksum used to. The Zagwe dynasty is known for creating churches carved directly from stone monoliths. Unlike Aksum, Zagwe had little contact with the outside world, seemingly only having relations with the Fatimid and Ayyubid caliphates. The Zagwe dynasty was eventually replaced by the Solomonic dynasty in 1270, which claimed direct lineage from the biblical figure of King Solomon. This Solomonic dynasty is the longest reigning in Ethiopian history and one of the longest reigning in world history, as it reigned from 1270 to 1974. During the beginning of the Solomonic dynasty, also known as Abyssinia, many Islamic powers grew around them and they became very isolated. This dynasty faced disaster in 1540 when the Adal Sultanate conquered much of their territory. They were only saved when the Portuguese provided guns to Abyssinia because of its Christian status. With these guns, the Abyssinians were able to reconquer, but they were shut in from more expansion because of the Ottoman Empire, which had greatly expanded throughout the 14 and 1500s. The Ottoman Empire propped up many Islamic sultanates in Ethiopia. This status quo continued until the late 1800s when European powers began to start humiliating the Ottomans and becoming interested in Africa. In 1884, European powers met up in Berlin to divide Africa between themselves. In this division, most of Africa was divided up between France, Britain, and Germany. Italy also gained substantial territories and was especially interested in the Horn of Africa. Because of this, Italy interacted with Abyssinia and created a treaty with them that gave Italy territory along the Red Sea. But in the Italian translation, it also basically made Abyssinia protectorate or puppet of Italy. This came to a head when Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1895. But to Europe's dismay, Italy was defeated by Abyssinia. This was partly because of the amazing leadership of the Abyssinian king Menelik II. Menelik II conquered many territories for Abyssinia, and of course defended it from the Italians. This shape of Ethiopia lasted until the Second Italian-Ethiopian War in 1935, where Italy, under Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia again and succeeded this time. During this war, the Italians used chemical warfare against Abyssinians and annexed Ethiopia to part of Italian East Africa. Eventually, Italy joined World War II in 1940, and during the war, the United Kingdom conquered Italian East Africa. At the end of World War II, Ethiopia took the previous Italian colony of Eritrea. Ethiopia remained like this until 1974, when a communist revolution took place, and these communists maintained power over Ethiopia until 1991, when the People's Revolutionary Democratic Front took over and eventually established a parliamentary democracy. Also in 1991, Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia, giving the nation its modern-day borders. Tentative peace remained in Ethiopia, with small conflicts in Somalia and small political upheaval being the largest events until 2020. In 2020, the Tigray War erupted in northern Ethiopia between the central government and the Tigray Regional Republic. This war ended in 2022 and was one of the deadliest conflicts in the 21st century. Sadly, because of over a century of European domination, political violence, and civil wars, today Ethiopia is an impoverished nation. But if it played its cards right, it can see a bright future with a growing population and economy. But what if all of this was different? In the early 500s AD, Aksum was a powerful nation with dominance over Red Sea trade. To help secure this dominance and end the persecution of Christians across the Red Sea in Himyar, Aksum invaded the southern Arabian Peninsula and faced off against both Himyarites and Persians. In real life, these conquests were limited to just the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula, But if the Ethiopians committed more to these conquests, history could be forever changed. In this scenario, Aksum continues these conquests and importantly conquers up the Arabian Red Sea coast to the cities of Mecca and Medina. Importantly, these cities would be conquered during Muhammad's early life, and local rulers loyal to Aksum would be set up and strengthened. With this increased control, the king of Mecca is able to secure control of the city, and Muhammad is never able to conquer any territory or spread the religion of Islam. Firstly, this premise is not meant to be offensive or to discredit Islam, but just an examination of how Ethiopia could be more powerful. Also, I want to add that stopping Islam creates possibly the most butterfly effects of any scenario one could create. I won't try very hard to realistically predict what would happen, but will instead give my own take on what might happen. Without the presence of Islam and the massive shakeup it caused in the Middle East, the region would remain in competition between the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Sassanid Empire in the east. By 700, the Byzantines reconquered many of their previous territories, but still lost much of Italy and all of Spain. During this time, Arabia was divided up into zones of influence between the Byzantines in the northwest, Aksum in the south, and the Sassanids in the east. Along with these conquests in Arabia, Aksum would conquer up the Nile to gain influence in the Nubian kingdom of Makuria, and south into the region inhabited by the Oromo people. With all of these new conquests, Aksum's control of Red Sea trade from India and further east is stronger than ever, allowing Aksum to prosper. From the 700s, the first real shakeup in the Middle East since Rome's arrival occurs when Egypt breaks off from the Byzantine Empire. Egypt practiced Coptic Christianity, while the Byzantine state religion was Greek Orthodoxy, and this became the main divide between the two regions. Eventually, disputes between the patriarchs of Constantinople and Alexandria led to Egypt breaking away from the Byzantines, taking much of the Levant with it. This Egypt is much different from Egypt in real life, as it speaks Coptic instead of Arabic. Coptic is a Semitic language related to Arabic, but is unintelligible to Arabic, and is descended from ancient Egyptian. Egypt is also almost fully Christian, with its own Coptic branch of Orthodox Christianity. This split of Egypt greatly affected Aksum, as it interacted less with the Byzantines and interacted much more with Egypt. The Sassanids were unable to take advantage of this split and just stayed constant during this period. In the late 700s, the Frankish Empire greatly expanded in Europe and constituted the end of the Oceanic Silk Road, which traded spices and other goods from the east in the Trivigine Empire and Chalukwan Empire through Aksum and Egypt, and finally to Francia and Europe. By the turn of the millennium, Aksum had greatly expanded along the Horn of Africa by expanding their influence over the Somali tribes, and they were able to conquer Oman as a result of Sassanid weakness. The Sassanid Empire began to lose territories to Arab and Turkic invasions from the Ghaznavids in the east to the Migran in the south. This loss of competition gave Egypt the liberty to expand to the west and retake many former Byzantine territories. In Europe, Sicilia splits from Byzantium, and the Holy Roman Empire establishes itself from the remnants of the Frankish Empire in Germany and northern Italy. Importantly for Aksum, the Chola Empire expands in southern India and becomes their most important trader partner besides Egypt. Sassanids' final fall comes from the north, with the Seljuk Turks invading and migrating into the region during the 1100s. The Seljuks conquer massive territories in Arabia and Mesopotamia, but are stopped by the Byzantines in the Anatolian highlands, sparing the Anatolian interior from Turkic migration. The Seljuks conquer Oman from Aksum, but otherwise are not that much of an issue for the nation. During this time, the Byzantines begin to stagnate and focus more on internal issues than outward expansion or politics. Also during the 1100s, the Holy Roman Empire expands in Europe, and the Pala Empire conquers much of northern India. In the mid-1200s, the Mongol tribes of Central Asia unite and quickly expand across the European steppe. After taking over the steppe, they captured the Russian and Persian states, and eventually, the Giant of China. Thanks to its relative isolation, Aksum is able to avoid Mongol conquests and fighting altogether, with little changing because of the massive upheaval in Eurasia. Much of this safety can be attributed to Egypt, which was able to hold off the Mongol horde and even take advantage of Byzantine weakness to capture Cyprus. The nation of Migran was also able to avoid Mongol conquest and began to fall under Aksum's sway. Upon the collapse of the Mongol Empire, the world regained some of its normalcy, and Aksum continues to gain wealth from Red Sea trade. One large impact of Islam never existing is the continued existence of the Byzantine Empire. With Aksum controlling Red Sea trade, and the Byzantines controlling the overland routes between Asia and Europe, trade is not controlled by the Islamic powers such as the Ottomans, which increased taxes on trade. This difficulty of trade is part of what motivated European powers to explore and discover the New World. With these trade routes not being hampered, it's possible Europe would never discover the Americas. In this scenario, the Europeans do begin to explore and colonize, but they begin over half a century later, with no European colonies in the Americas existing by 1500. During the period after the Mongol collapse, Aksum began large expansions down the African coast, continuing to be the hegemon of trade between Europe and Asia. In the Middle East, Egypt loses large territories, and Turkic tribes that migrated into Mesopotamia during the Seljuk and Mongol period found the nation of Akulnu. In Europe, Poland greatly expands, and the Russian states of Novgorod and Muscovy compete. Even though they started later, the European powers still do discover the Americas and colonize as much territory as they can. By 1700, much of the Americas were divided up, with most going to the three Iberian nations of Lusitania, Hispania, and Emporia. The French, British, and Germans also get in on this colonization. In Europe during this time, Poland and Russia compete, with Russia expanding to the east and Poland expanding to the west. Poland was allowed to expand west because the Holy Roman Empire fell and was replaced with the German kingdom. In the Middle East, the Arabs formed their first major state by conquering into Mesopotamia and the Levant. Aksum reaches its all-time height around this time as well, with control stretching from Egypt in the north to modern-day Mozambique in the south, and with full control over southern Arabia. With this power, Aksum begins to send expeditions out farther and starts substantial contact with the Mughals, Kannada, and the massive Qing dynasty. Sadly, even in this timeline, Ethiopia does decline as the Europeans' might becomes unstoppable. Luckily for Aksum, they are a very influential country when the Berlin Conference is held, and have some respect from the European nations for their Christian faith. Because of this, Aksum retains many territories both in the Horn of Africa and the southern Arabian Peninsula. Both Ethiopia and Arabia are dominated by the UK economically, but retain a large degree of independence. During the decades following the Berlin Conference, the UK recognizes Aksum's economic potential and begins to invest in the nation. During the 1900s, many wars between Europeans take place that don't really concern the scenario, as they don't concern Aksum. In one of these wars, Germany is defeated, and Aksum is allowed to annex some German colonial territory. During the late 1900s, more investment comes into Aksum, and they begin to industrialize, becoming somewhat of a China of Africa, with a fast industrialization process and a large manufacturing center. During the late 1900s and early 2000s, a lot of European and American industry is transferred to Aksum and East Africa in general. Also during the early 2000s, Aksum works with nations in the East Africa to form the Ethiopian Union. This is not a nation in its own right, but is a tight economic and political alliance between nations in East Africa, similar to the European Union. In the modern day, Aksum is by far the most powerful and important nation in Africa, and has an economic power only surpassed by behemoths like China, Mexico, Germany, and Poland. The Ethiopian Union is one of the most important organizations in the world, with a quickly growing population and an even quicker growing economy. If the Ethiopian Union was considered to be one nation, it would be projected to have the largest economy in the world by 2100. Aksum has a population of 364.2 million, which is comparable to the United States, and has an area of 3,176,000 kilometers squared, which is comparable to India. Aksum has a GDP of 5.28 trillion, which is comparable to Germany, and a GDP per capita of 14.5 thousand, which is comparable to Argentina and even larger than that of China. Aksum is divided into 6 cultural regions of Amhara, Tigray, Himyar, Oromio, Neola, and Somalia. Amhara is located in the Ethiopian highlands and is by far the most populous province, with 121.3 million people. The language spoken by almost all of Amhara is Ge'ez, which is an Afro-Asiatic language, meaning it is in the same family that holds Arabic and Hebrew. Amhara holds the second largest metro area, Addis Ababa, which holds the headquarters of the Ethiopian Union. Tigray is located to North Amhara along the Red Sea coast. Tigray is the birthplace of the Aksum kingdom and Ethiopia as a whole. It holds the largest city and capital of Aksum, which has a population of 16.4 million. Tigray has a population of 59.4 million and speaks the Ge'ez language. Himyar is separated from the rest of the nation by the Red Sea, but is very culturally similar to the rest of the nation. Himyar has a population of 51.1 million and speaks Himyari, which is closely related to Ge'ez. Oromia is located to the south of Amhara in a flatter region with territory along the coast and a population of 46.7 million. Oromia controls the important trade cities of Mombasa and Mzizima. Of course, the Oromo language is widely spoken, which is distantly related to Ge'ez, but closely related to Somali. In the south, the Swahili language is spoken, which is a Bantu language, meaning it is totally unrelated to other languages in the nation, but it does have many loanwords from languages such as Ge'ez and Oromo. Neola is located along the Nile and is the most diverse region of the nation. Neola has a population of 44.2 million and has the large city of Khartoum. Neola mostly speaks the three languages of Nubian, Shilluk, and Nuer. These languages are all Nilotic, meaning they are unrelated to Ge'ez and other Afro-Asiatic languages, but are all related to each other. Somalia is located on the actual Horn of Africa and has a population of 38.4. Somalia, of course, speaks Somali, which is closely related to Oromo. The Ethiopian Union as a whole has a population of 775.7 million in an area of 8,968,000 kilometers squared. It has a GDP of 9.13 trillion and an average GDP per capita of 11.7 thousand. The union's headquarters are in Addis Ababa, which was chosen over Aksum because of its more central location. The most important nations in the Ethiopian Union are, of course, Aksum, along with Luganda on Lake Victoria, Zambezia along the Zambezi River in the south, and Kenya, also along Lake Victoria. Oman is also important because of its oil and natural gas reserves. The largest cities located outside of Aksum are Nairobi in Kenya, Kampala in Luganda, and Meroe in Nubia. As a whole, the Ethiopian Union is an important economic union on the world stage and is projected to become more and more powerful as the 2000s continue on. In this alternate world, Ethiopia brings to mind images of stamps saying made in Ethiopia, kings draped in gold, and churches chiseled in stone.